All right, let's get into it. Today, we are breaking down Mark Manson's book that was everywhere a few years ago, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Now, this is not your typical think positive and everything will be great kind of self-help book. Nah. In fact, it pretty much flips that entire idea on its head. And it all starts with the story of a guy who was maybe the last person you'd ever pick as a role model. And that brings us to the first big idea of the book, which sounds crazy at first. Don't try. It just goes against everything we're taught about success, and Manson introduces it through this very unlikely hero. So I want you to meet Charles Bukowski. This guy was, by pretty much every measure, a loser. For decades, he had this dream of being a writer, but all he got was rejection letter after rejection letter. He worked a soul-crushing job at a post office, and whatever money he made, he'd just blow on booze and betting. He was, for all intents and purposes, a failure. But then, after basically a lifetime of this, something completely unexpected happened. When he was 50 years old, a tiny little publisher decided to take a chance on him. So Bukowski quit his job, hammered out his first novel in just 3 weeks, and then went on to sell millions and millions of books. It sounds like the perfect American dream story, right? The guy who just refused to give up and finally made it big. But that's not really the story at all. Because on his tombstone, you know what it says? 2 words. Don't try. And that right there is the key to his whole life. Bukowski's success didn't come because he was desperately trying to be a winner. It happened because he knew he was a loser. He accepted it and he wrote about it with this raw, brutal honesty. He wasn't trying to be someone else, he was just himself, with all his flaws out in the open. So why does this Bukowski guy matter? Well, his mindset is the perfect antidote to this modern psychological trap that Manson calls the feedback loop from hell. And it's something a lot of us fall into without even noticing. You know the drill. Our culture, and especially our social media feeds, are just a constant fire hose of messages telling us we need to be happier, healthier, richer, smarter, sexier, you name it. But here's the ironic twist. Obsessing over all the positive things just constantly reminds us of everything we're not. It just hammers home the idea that we aren't good enough right now. And what that creates is the feedback loop from hell. It works like this. You feel anxious about something. Okay, that's normal. But then you start getting anxious about being anxious. Then maybe you feel guilty for feeling anxious because you're supposed to be positive. And boom, you're in this vicious cycle where you're judging your own emotions, which just makes you feel even worse. So how in the world do you get out of a loop like that? Well, Manson brings up this idea from the philosopher Alan Watts called the backwards law. And it's pretty simple, really. The more you desperately chase feeling good, the more unsatisfied you become. Why? Because the act of pursuing it just reinforces the fact that you don't have it in the first place. And this is the absolute core of the entire book. It's a paradox. Wanting a positive experience, like wanting to be happy and confident, is in itself a negative experience. But, and here's the wild part, accepting a negative experience, like facing your fears or admitting you screwed up, is actually a positive experience. It's by walking through the fire that we become fireproof. It's by admitting our failures that we actually learn how to get better. Okay, so hold on. If we're supposed to just accept the negative, does that mean we should just be doormats and let life walk all over us? No, not at all. It means we have to get smart about choosing what kind of suffering we're willing to put up with. This is the real question we should be asking ourselves. Look, everybody wants the good stuff. Everybody wants a great relationship, a fulfilling career, to be happy. But happiness isn't just something you find. It requires a struggle. So the important question isn't what joy do you want? It's what pain are you willing to endure to get it? What's the struggle you're willing to choose? Let me give you a perfect example of this. In 1983, a guitarist named Dave Mustaine got kicked out of his band. And this wasn't just any band practice. They kicked him out right before they were about to record their very first album. He was furious, devastated, and he vowed revenge. So he went out and started his own band, Megadeth, which became legendary. They sold over 25 million albums. A huge success, right? Well, here's the catch. The band that kicked him out? It was Metallica. And because Dave Mustaine chose his metric for success, his struggle, as be bigger and more successful than Metallica, he was doomed. By his own yardstick, no matter how many millions of albums he sold, he would always see himself as a failure. Now, let's contrast that story with Pete Best's. He was the original drummer for the Beatles, and yes, he was fired right before they became the biggest band in the history of the world. I mean, can you imagine? The blow sent him into a spiral of depression for years. But look at the difference here. Unlike Mustaine, Pete Best eventually changed his values. He decided what really mattered wasn't fame or fortune, but having a stable marriage and a loving family. And years later, he said he was happier than he ever would have been with the Beatles. Why? Because he chose a new metric for his life, a new struggle, one that was meaningful to him and within his control. The point is, we choose the yardstick that measures our life.
So choosing our values, choosing our struggles, this all leads us to this next really powerful and, let's be honest, kind of difficult idea about what it means to be responsible.
This is the story of William James, who's now known as the father of American psychology. But back in the day, he was a mess. He was sickly, deeply depressed, and just felt completely powerless over his own life. So he decided to try an experiment. He said, for 1 year, I'm going to choose to believe that I am 100% responsible for everything that happens to me. That single mindset shift completely transformed his entire life. We've all heard the Spider-Man line a million times, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Well, Manson brilliantly flips it right on its head. With great responsibility comes great power. The more we choose to take responsibility for our own problems, even the ones that aren't our fault, the more power we actually have to change things. Now, to really get this, you have to understand one super important distinction. Fault is not the same thing as responsibility. Fault is past tense. It's about choices that have already been made. Somebody else might be at fault for the bad situation you're in, but responsibility, that's present tense. You are always responsible for how you choose to react, how you choose to feel, and what you choose to do about it, right now, in this moment. All right, so let's bring this all home. This all comes together in the final section where we look at all these ideas through the ultimate lens, our own mortality. Okay, this is one of the wildest stories I've ever heard. Meet Hiro Onoda. He was a Japanese soldier in World War II, and his commander gave him one order: never surrender. And he took that very, very literally. For 30 years after the war had ended, he stayed hidden in the jungle in the Philippines, still fighting a war that had been over for decades. Now, here's what's so fascinating. For those 30 years, all that suffering, the hunger, the loneliness, the fear, it was meaningful. It served a greater purpose in his mind, loyalty to his emperor. But when he was finally found and returned to a modern Japan he didn't even recognize, that purpose vanished. And suddenly, his life felt empty, and his suffering became unbearable because it was all for nothing. And that brings us to the ultimate gut check for our own values. Death is the one thing that strips away everything that's trivial and unimportant. It forces us to ask the real questions. Knowing that your time here is limited, what do you really, truly care about? What's the mark you're going to leave? So we'll end it right back where we started, with a powerful thought from Charles Bukowski. In the grand scheme of things, our lives are just a brief little flash. The shared inevitable fate we all have, you'd think it would bring us all together. So the question this whole explainer really leaves you with is this: given that your time is short, what are you choosing to give a frick about?